Robert Wyatt is an Englishman who was a musician and a central figure of the Canterbury Scene. He was in the bands Soft Machine and Matching Mole, and at that point he was a drummer. Matching Mole were about to record their third album when Robert fell out of a window at a birthday party for members of Gong, who were another Canterbury Scene band. He was drunk at the time. He was paralysed from the waist down. That was 1973. So he stopped being primarily a drummer. He still did play drums, but without using the pedals. And he continued to have a solo career. So he'd already released one solo album by this time, but he then started to concentrate on his solo career. He's released 8 more solo albums since then, his most recent being in 2007. He is now considered to be retired. Hi, my name's Dan. So this is Robert Wyatt's 7th solo album, and it's my first listen to it. So I have come across one of his albums before. I've come across him in Soft Machine, and I've come across him in Matching Mole, and I've also come across his album Rock Bottom, which was his second solo album and the first one after his accident. And in fact, I've already reviewed Rock Bottom twice before, so the history of my reviewing is that first I started doing reviews on Facebook for my friends of progressive rock albums, which I then turned into a virtual coffee table book. This was years ago. Then I started doing mainstream stuff, and I created a list of my own and was reviewing on a blog, and then I abandoned that in order to go to YouTube videos and review this list. Now, Rock Bottom is probably one of the few albums that I'm going to end up reviewing 3 times as a result of this, because it is here higher up the list. So that's all just context. I need to start getting into some description. And so if it means anything to you, I would certainly say that this is Canterbury Scene progressive rock. So the Canterbury Scene was, if you don't know, was considered, or is now considered to have been a subset or a subgenre of progressive rock, which was focused around London, but quite a few of the key figures in it originated from Canterbury, which is how it got its name. And it was born bands like Gong and Camel and Caravan and Soft Machine, which had a kind of, they weren't as full-on complex prog as bands like Genesis and Yes and stuff like that. They had elements of jazz in there as well, particularly jazz fusion, but also elements of psychedelia coming through from kind of hippie folk stuff as well. And Robert Wyatt, if he's anything, he's kind of one of the linchpins of the Canterbury Scene, and he's kind of almost the epitome of the Canterbury Scene, which is the stuff that he does has got this kind of studied bonkersness to it, but is deceptively kind of, it seems like it's trivial, but musically it's really good, or it can be. And there's certainly some excellent music on this album, I would say. So it's quite diverse musically. There's kind of folky stuff, there's rock stuff, there's jazz bits, there's bits that probably best described as prog, I guess. There's kind of drony bits. There's quite a few melodic, classical melodic instruments being used in here, the brass, but violins, and, saxophones and things like that. And sometimes it's kind of very coherent and straightforward, and sometimes it's a bit freer, so you've got a few of the instruments who are kind of wandering off a little bit, doing their own thing. It makes it start to feel a bit more jazz. And then sometimes it goes as extreme as having pretty much 2 different things going on at the same time, or quite off the wall. So varied in that sense. There's quite a few guest musicians here, so it's not just Robert Wyatt. But the 3 names that jumped out at me are Brian Eno and Phil Manzera, both of whom were in Roxy Music, and Paul Weller. Robert's singing voice is quite distinctive, I find it quite hard to describe voices often. His delivery somehow is kind of high most of the time. It doesn't have to be. There are bits where he's singing along with himself in octaves. It's somehow quite. It's not flashy. He's got a clear accent that comes across. Not everybody when they sings. Their regional accents don't necessarily come through in that, but his does, and it feels kind of vulnerable and personal, while also feeling kind of a bit, on the bonkers side. And this is emphasised by the content, so the content's quite off the wall often. Some of the tracks are more measured, and there's some quite melancholy stuff going on in here, especially later on in the album, which is where musically I really started to enjoy it quite a lot. Some of the others are quite focused on wordplay and are quite surrealistic at times. There's one of the tracks has got a whole lot of kind of comparisons about not exactly smiling but not exactly frowning, and a whole load of things like that going on. Probably the most interesting in that sense, to me anyway, was the track The Duchess, which is quite early on in the album, where he starts by singing a different tempo and rhythm to the backing that's going on. Eventually the backing kind of catches up with him, and he's kind of singing this almost Grand Old Duke of York tune. I'm just going to pull out one of the verses here, which is, I've never heard anything quite like this before, which is, oh, my wife is fat and thin, she's generous and mean, she's and her secret's safe with me. And that just makes me laugh. It's just a really, how does somebody think of doing that? Anyway, it's interesting. Later on in the album, there's a track called Blues in Bob Minor, and when I heard it, I thought, oh, I recognise this, and actually, it's kind of, so it's certainly modelled on, let's say, Subterranean Homesick Blues by Bob Dylan. And some of the words, at least to start off with, have similarities. But musically the backing's different. The delivery of the words is similar, but actually the lyrics diverge from that quite quickly. And there's a lot of stuff going on in that track. It's a strong track. There's a lot of picture language going on in there. So overall, it's very English, I would say. It's definitely very Canterbury Scene. It's interesting to me that he was still doing stuff that was so recognisably Canterbury in what is this, the late 90s, when I feel like pretty much everybody else had abandoned this. And it's somewhat off the wall, definitely. But I found it to be a grower. I found myself quite engaged with it. So I liked it. And as always, I'd love to know what you think. So please do talk to me through the comments box. That's it from me for now.
Roger's in the archive, looking up casement. Martha's in the government, digging up the basement. Rebel little representative for the voter. Shadow backbencher, couldn't get a word in. Turned up anyway, his fuse burning or consuming. Drinks in the cabinet, spent a lot of time just